so for people who've been brought up in it, like I was, and then you just fellowshipped at a young age or whatever age, yeah, you are. The recovery from being cut off from your family is fairly hard. I mean, it's a long road.
Yeah.
And I don't think I didn't realise I was really that damaged until much later in life, when it really manifested itself in my late 20s, early 30s, when I was so self-destructive. You know, it was costing me just about everything I had.
Yeah. And I'd love to understand more that kind of that sort of junction, if you like, between losing a spirituality as well, because you not only do you use your belief, but you lose your faith. You've got to give up faith, and faith, I think, is different to, like, belief is a kind of ritualised every day, you know, but faith is something kind of larger, maybe, you know. That, plus, also that kind of acceptance of yourself, not only as a non-Jehovah's Witness or a postulate, is that the
apostate?
Apostate, sorry. I suppose what I did think was actually there's a community there, isn't it? There's actually, there must be now a community of people who've left, who share. So in a sense, that idea of being isolated could be combated by the fact that there are people who have left that environment. So there seemed to be almost a movement, kind of, which felt very empowering. But also, I kind of wondered what would happen if you put 68 people who have recently left, you know, a very traumatic situation together. Do they create another traumatic group, you know, which are just antithesis of where they just left? I suppose that's what was interesting to me about that.
I think, especially maybe for maybe Australian groups, that people have left at different stages. So you've got people that have only left very recently, in the last year, for example. But you've got people that have left 20 odd years ago. You've got that whole range in between. So there is a good cross section of people to draw on. That there's plenty of people in a good place right now that have weathered the storm, have gotten through it. I think to help the ones that are, you know, newly coming out. But I think my take on it is that I believe there should be some real professional expertise where people can turn to if they need it. And that's, I think, probably why I've come here today, to talk to you about the things that people should try and do to get themselves through. It's almost a grieving process, I suppose.
Oh, a loss, yeah.
A huge loss. So that's more, I suppose, why I've come to talk to you today, with your expertise in counselling that you've got.
Well, if you take a grief model, there's a model that there's a charity in the UK called Cruise Counselling, and they're experts in grief counselling. That's what they do, and they created a model which I think is a very useful one, because it's complex. It doesn't just see grief as a kind of the 4 stages, or, you know, it's kind of complex, and it also gives people a chance to never really fully complete the process. You know, that perhaps leaving and feeling sad is as best as you can do. You know, and I think one of the things it talks about is talks about all these false moments of false recovery or a false reparation. So, so if we use the grief model, or the idea of grief, so you lose something, someone dies, or something dies, or a routine dies, or a group of people move away from you, and there's this moment of euphoria. You did it, you left, you got out, you know, that's it, my problems are solved, you know. So there's this moment, and sometimes around bereavement that can come with things like a funeral, or, you know, it's lots of busyness, you know, there's lots of activity and lots of interaction with other people. So people are always asked, they remember the fact this just happened, so they're always asking you, how are you doing? How's it going? And there can be this moment of what the cruise model calls the false depression. So it's like, I feel terrible. And it's almost like we're trying depression out, we're giving depression a go to see if it's... But there is this sense of change, there's a sense of great energy around the fact that something massive has changed, and within that there's some exciting energy as well. So this is the idea of the false depression, and that's sometimes where people go wrong, is in thinking about reframing their life and dealing with change, whatever that change is, or loss, in the fact that they would see that false depression as, that's it, I've had my depression. Now my job is to move on, But very often people have struggled so much, and I think it must be so much the case when trying to leave something like Jehovah's Witness family, or what's the right term?
Yeah, but you've
family, Jehovah's Witness.
Yeah.
It must be so difficult to do that, because there must be a moment where you kind of go, I did it, that's it, And very often all the energy has been about leaving, without necessarily thinking about how the next bit's going to feel. And that idea that the grass is always greener, so everything outside Jehovah's Witness family is going to be fantastic. And then you hit this world who doesn't care, doesn't give a damn really of what you've done, your struggles, and and this is the world that's meant to embrace you better than the world you're in, and very often in grief and loss that comes through with people just forget that you've had this big loss, and people move away, or family members stop visiting, and it's like, well, get on with it then, And then what the process that crews talk about is the idea that that's when you would have what they call the necessary depression. So there is with loss, with any kind of change, and this can be true with addiction as well. So it can be true with giving up smoking or food addictions, or you have to experience the necessary depression of you alone as a person, no longer having that thing in your life, and whatever feelings that might bring around of anger, or and to have that moment of depression. Now, one of the things that I think is just true, and I've seen it in my career, is people can just stay there. People can stay at that point, and sometimes I think it depends on the severity of the trauma. If that person is left feeling exhausted and so confused, has no real footholds, no one around them offering them footholds to climb up, just without any structure and without any sense of what's being offered to them is supportive, or very suspicious of what's being offered to them. People do just stay in that depressive state, and this model kind of says that's all right, that's a possibility, and people will learn to live with depression and loss, and will just stay in that place where actually I don't know how to rise up, I don't know how to recover. So sometimes recovery is just about learning to deal with depression, and that's a fact that isn't really, people don't talk about that when they talk about recovery. They talk about recovery as in, you'll be on a beach in the sunset any minute now, paradise is just around the corner, but that's not true.
That's no pun, actually, is it? Paradise is just around the corner. That wasn't an intentional pun on your part,
no.
Was it? I'm only kidding.
Oh, right.
That's actually a very meaningful teaching that the JW's actually put out there.
Well, don't know how that got in there. Well, what I was thinking about was that, that kind of filmic idea of walking into the sunset, that kind of, the fact that you've succeeded, or something big has changed and it's all good. And I think the shock is people don't always get there. If there is enough energy, and if there is enough support, and if enough impetus, or there could be just a very good reason. It could be that, like with grief, for instance, parents have to keep going for the children, or if you have a new partner, that new relationship or new love can help pull you up, or if you feel purposeful in your job, you feel a social responsibility to keep going, then those sorts of things can offer you footholds to climb out of that necessary depression, and actually from then on it's quite exciting what happens. But it is a rise up into a completely new way of being, and you only know you're there when you can't remember what that felt like anymore.
Yep.
So I used the idea of, for myself, a long-term relationship which ended, very, very difficult kind of ending. I had to work hard at thinking about how to come through that successfully, and but there came a point, without me realising it 4 years later, I can't remember what Sundays were like with this person. What do we do? What do we talk about? I can't even remember. And that's when that change has been successfully worked through, when it's just, you're now in a new normal. But that process itself can be very arduous. And the move from the necessary depression through to the new normal comes with understanding the benefits that the new normal can offer you. So my grandmother, I remember when my grandfather died, horrible. I mean, they were together all their lives. They were childhood sweethearts. But there came a point about a year and a half after my grandfather died, when my grandmother sat there and said, I sign my own cheques now. And there was a sense that there's a benefit that, I've become an independent woman. So she could see that even though there was a huge loss, there was also something else that could be gained from that, positive that could be gained from that. But they're very small steps, and they're very arduous and hard to, and people slide back down, and all of that is a necessary process. That's not something which we have a lot of control over, really. Other than the fact that at that moment when someone decides that they have some energy in one peak or trough of their depression, if someone can grab someone at that point, that could be what people will see as the turning point. That's the day things change for me. People will discuss it as a kind of euphoric, penny dropping moment, whereas in fact it's actually the product of possibly months, even years of hard work.
Yeah. You talked about those steps of sort of climbing up or being held up. I look at the group that I belong to, the forum that I belong to, that XJWs seem to be able to find quite easily and come into. I find that to be a really good climbing mechanism out of some of your thoughts and some of your anger, I think.
Well, sometimes people just need to know something's there, but they don't have to be using it that day because they're not ready. But it needs to be there when they're ready. And I think the only thing I think things like that, the only thing I think someone who's too near to someone, depression is very difficult to look at. It's very difficult to live alongside. There's the kind of whole projection of the hopelessness, and and it can be a very, very difficult thing to sit next to. And I think in that sense, people want to make it better and want to, come on, cheer up, come on, as if there's any way that can happen. So I think rushing people, I think, is the only thing you can do that would be harmful. Because the whole point is this person's now making their own choices. And if they want to be depressed for 2 years, it may not look great, it may not be a great look on them, it might be hard on you, but it's still their choice, which is actually quite, in a weird way, kind of empowering.